Today in Europe. This is the time when the Columbia Broadcasting System calls in CBS representatives abroad for the latest news of the day in Europe, where there's been a good deal of naval activity, very little military activity, and more diplomatic activity. Tonight, our first report will come from William L. Shira, who is to speak to us from Geneva. We take you now to Geneva. We've just been calling in Mr. William L. Shira, who is to give his report to us from Geneva, Switzerland. We are notified that there will be a short delay while some of the technical difficulties are being ironed out. There is a magnetic storm over the Atlantic. We shall call in Mr. Shira in Geneva in just a moment or two. Meanwhile, here's news from Paris that Finland's Scandinavian neighbors are reported to have advised the Finns that it will be up to them alone, up to Finland alone, if Soviet Russia should attack the tiny Baltic nation. French quarters in Paris have heard tonight that Denmark, Sweden, and Norway have informed the Helsinki government that they cannot be counted upon for military help if the Red Army should move to enforce Moscow's demands. The three Scandinavian states were said to have stressed that the so-called Oslo Group is purely an economic bloc without any military or political ties. And as a result, it said in Paris, Denmark, Sweden, and Norway cannot be expected to jeopardize their own neutrality by aiding Finland militarily. Thus, it was stated in Paris tonight, the three nations' appeals to Moscow to preserve friendly relations with Finland carry nothing more than moral weight. French quarters regard Finland's plight as a test case that may prove the extent of Russia's expansionist ambitions and her tie-up with Germany. That's the latest word from Paris this evening. And now it seems we shall be unable to call in Mr. Shira from Geneva, Switzerland, for a report from Switzerland tonight. Mr. Shira is, of course, Columbia's Central European representative. He's been having a few days' vacation from Germany in Switzerland, and he was to report to us from Geneva tonight, but unfortunately, magnetic conditions over the Atlantic make that impossible. We have been informed that the atmospheric conditions are somewhat better between London and New York, and so now we're going to call in Edward R. Murrow for a report from London. Go ahead, London.
This is London. I've just been listening to Bob Trout's report concerning the situation regarding the negotiations between Finland and the Soviet Union. There's not much to be added to that statement from London, other than to give you two conflicting reports. The first from Copenhagen, which says that no official statement as to the negotiations between Finland and Russia, which are continued in Moscow this afternoon. It's generally believed that there is no hint as to the subjects that have been discussed. On the other hand, the official German news agency, quoted by Reuters, says that after examining the basis of the Soviet proposals, the Finnish government announced tonight that it approved Moscow's suggestions and concluded that negotiations could continue. That report came from the official German news agency, as quoted by Reuters. The latest news bulletin in this country opened with a statement from the Admiralty. It was as follows. The Admiralty announces that today, Friday the 13th, has been unlucky for the U-boats, two having been destroyed. The hunting crafts were able to rescue some of the survivors. Since that announcement, there has been a subsequent statement by the Admiralty stating that still another U-boat has been sunk in the course of today. The Rome radio stated tonight that the Pope is expected to issue an encyclical on Sunday, October the 29th, which it is believed will contain a last appeal to the nations to avert the scourge of war. There was also broadcast here in Britain tonight the following statement. Well-informed Nazi quarters in Berlin say that there is a strong likelihood that Mr. Molotov or Mr. Potemkin, the Soviet Vice Commissar for Foreign Affairs, and Count Ciano will come to Berlin to confer with the German government. Berlin also says that the period of diplomatic discussions is past, and that any future consultation will be on active measures aimed at stopping the war as quickly as possible. Now here is Bill Henry's story for today from the Royal Air Force in France. He says, I can't help wondering what an old French chap whose beautiful estate I visited this morning must really think when he looks out of his rear windows into the beautiful wooded garden behind his house. I didn't have a chance to chat with him, so I don't know what he thinks, but I most certainly do know what he sees, and that makes me all the more anxious to know what he really thinks. He may, of course, only see what he has seen for many years as he looked out of those rear windows, for it takes sharp eyes to see any change. And the old chap's eyes, I rather imagine, aren't quite what they used to be. But if he could see what I could see, he's probably muttering in his beard. For the Royal Air Force has turned his lovely leafy garden into a tremendous auto park, in which the towering trucks with their loads of airplane wings, engines, spare parts, and other sinews of aerial warfare hide themselves from the sun and from prying eyes like sleepy elephants in Indian forests. They're camouflaged, and even when you're looking for them, they're hard to see. But they're there when you look carefully, ready to roll out to keep the scattered airfields nearer the front lines well supplied with everything they need to keep them running. Just across the way, in the spacious barns of another Frenchman, are hidden the stores, which are carried away nightly by trucks. Sides of beef, mountains of fresh bread, tins of jam and margarine and tea and cocoa, crates of lettuce, yes, and some of the munitions, which is the deadly part of war. They're all piled up there together with those letters from home, stacks of them, which arrive about every day from the post office and are ready for distribution. The truck drivers in the Chateau garden are a happy lot. They're making a mighty fine road through the place for the old chap, something he'll have as a keepsake when this war is over and the Tommies have gone home again. And they fixed up some spots in his garden that'll be a real surprise to the old chap when he gets out there to have a look. I visited a place over in one corner, which 3 of the drivers have fixed up for themselves as a place to sleep. A sign outside calls it, rather imposingly, the Grosvenor House Hotel. They bang together 3 beds, put up a stove in the corner, strung lines for their washing among the trees, and have even hooked themselves up a connection with the power truck so that they have electric light and a connection for their radio set. They were able to tell a friend of mine from the British Broadcasting Corporation, who'd been worrying whether or not his stuff was getting through, that they'd heard him from London the night before. I don't know, says Bill Henry, what this old gentleman thinks of it all of the things that are going on in his backyard. But I'm willing to guarantee that it's quite an interesting experience for the old chap. He'll have something pretty special to remember about the autumn of 1939. I return you now to Columbia in New York.
That was Edward R. Murrow reporting to us from London, and of course we heard Mr. Murrow, after his report, read a dispatch from Bill Henry, who is the CBS and Los Angeles Times war correspondent and who is now somewhere in France. Now let us have a report from our own capital city, from Washington, D.C., and for that report from Mr. Albert Warner, we take you now to Washington.
An American peace move in the European war seems no nearer at all for the time being. The suggestion from Dr. Dietrich, Germany's press chief, that the United States could still intervene to prevent terrible bloodshed found no response. Neither the White House nor the State Department showed interest, and now a German report says no appeal was made. The president himself made no comment on the first press report, except in a negative way. He said he knew of no official request from Germany for a mediator. Later, Secretary Hull added that Berlin had sent no word. The only difference in the Berlin story this morning from what it was several days ago is that this time the source of the talk about American mediation is given. This difference will hardly satisfy the White House. Unless there is an official message from Germany to this government, the situation will not have changed as far as the president is concerned. There will be no request on his desk. Without it, he has made quite clear he will consider no move at the present moment. Now, this evening, Berlin seems to indicate there will be no such request. Yet the president is not going to shut all doors to a peace move. Europe is in a fluid state, officials say. Complete upsets may be in the making. But this presidential move to moderate Russian demands on Finland is put in a different category. And in this effort to avert another war, or rather the spreading of the present war, Mr. Roosevelt is intensely interested. A good many other people in the United States are interested, too, if a demonstration I witnessed today is representative. I was at a luncheon in the National Press Club, at which my radio colleague, Mr. Borkage, was a speaker. Among the guests of honor presented to the audience was a youngish-looking man with a firm jaw and the build of an athlete. When he was introduced, that audience of 500 people, newspapermen from all parts of the United States, and a sizable group of congressmen, rose and cheered for almost 2 minutes. They were cheering for Minister Prokope of Finland and for the small, democratic, debt-paying country which he represented. Mr. Prokope, visibly moved, could not help replying, though he had no speech to make. I wish only to tell you, he said, how deep is the feeling of all Finland for the President of the United States, and for all this country for the highly important support given to Finland in this moment of very great concern. Mr. Roosevelt, at his press conference, told a little about his message to Moscow. It was a personal message from him to the President of the Soviet Presidium, Mr. Kalinin, he said. That name, by the way, recalled to many at the press conference that Russia does have a president. On Monday, Mr. Roosevelt said he was worrying about the situation in the Baltic because it looked like an extension of the war. The next day, the Scandinavian ministers saw him and Mr. Hull and voiced their concern. There was no mention of joint action. On Wednesday, the President drafted a personal message to Kalinin. That afternoon, the President saw Secretary Hull, and they edited the message. It was sent that evening to be presented to the Kremlin yesterday. Mr. Roosevelt said the text was not yet given out because he did not want it to seem a pressure move. He was simply voicing to Moscow the hope that nothing would be done to disturb the Baltic area or the independence of Finland. Vice President Garner was acting behind the Senate scenes today to influence action on the neutrality bill. First, he was seeking to hasten a vote, and then also he was guiding a compromise to loosen the restrictions in the bill on American shipping. We return you now to New York.
That was the report of Albert Warner in Washington. In New York, there's just time to tell you that we hear from Moscow that Russia's long negotiations for the Black Sea Pact with Turkey are now believed virtually completed tonight, and an announcement is expected soon in Moscow, the capital of Russia. That is the latest word that we have received from Moscow here in New York. Now, just a reminder that at 8:55 Eastern Time, CBS presents the nightly broadcast of Elmer Davis and the News. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.